Caught my spoiled sister kissing my BF a week before her wedding. Told her fiancé. Thought he ignored it, but he shocked everyone at the wedding. As a 28-year-old woman, I never imagined that my life would unravel in the way it did. Starting with a quiet suspicion that grew into an explosion of emotions. It all began just a week before my sister's wedding. My younger sister, Sarah, was 26, and I had always thought we were close. The wedding preparations were in full swing, and my boyfriend, Tom, was often around, helping out. I should have been happy. But something about Sarah's behavior was unsettling, like a dark cloud looming over an otherwise bright sky. Initially, I tried to brush off what I saw, the small touches, the unnecessary closeness, and the way she laughed at every joke Tom made, even the ones that weren't particularly funny. Sarah had always been the more exuberant one, someone who could charm her way out of anything. Her laughter was loud, sometimes over the top, and though I knew she loved being the center of attention, this felt different. It was almost as if she was trying to draw Tom in. Make herself seem irresistible. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that maybe she was just excited because of the upcoming wedding. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The turning point came during a family barbecue at my parents' house. I went inside to use the bathroom, and when I returned, I saw Sarah standing unusually close to Tom. She was whispering something, and her laughter rang out, clear and genuine. Tom looked uncomfortable but didn't pull away. The moment they saw me, they separated quickly. A chill ran down my spine, the kind you get when you realize something you'd feared all along might be true. That night, as we lay in bed, I tried to talk to Tom about what I had seen. He looked at me, confused and exasperated, as if I was grasping at straws. He said I was overreacting, that Sarah was simply being friendly. He assured me there was nothing to worry about, but the more he dismissed my feelings, the deeper my unease grew. I couldn't explain it, but I just knew, something was happening behind my back. I finally decided that it was time to confront Sarah. We met at a small cafe, the kind with dim lighting and rustic tables, perfect for a quiet conversation. Sarah arrived, her smile bright and her voice animated as she talked about the wedding. I could barely listen, my heart was pounding, and my hands felt clammy as I stirred my coffee. When I finally interrupted her, I told her about what I had seen and how uncomfortable I had been feeling. Her face changed, a mixture of shock, confusion, and eventually anger. She denied everything, calling me paranoid and insecure. She said Tom was practically family and accused me of not trusting her. Her words stung, but I couldn't back down. The truth was right there, in front of both of us. The rift between us deepened as the conversation continued. She stormed out, leaving me alone with my thoughts, which spiraled in circles. Was I really overreacting? Was I just being insecure? But then I thought of all the subtle gestures, the lingering looks, the excuses to be near Tom. I knew I wasn't imagining things. The following week was pure chaos. Sarah had told my parents about our argument, and they were furious. They accused me of trying to sabotage her wedding. My mother called me selfish, her voice breaking with the disappointment that I could even think of accusing my own sister of something like that. Tom, too, was frustrated with me, repeating that I was reading too much into things. It felt like everyone was against me, that I was losing my family, my boyfriend, my sense of stability, all at once. One day, a week before the wedding, I went to my parents' house to try to make peace. I wanted to put the past behind us, to apologize, even if I still felt something was off. As I approached the house, I heard voices from the side garden, low, hushed, almost intimate. I walked over, and what I saw stopped me in my tracks. There, behind a large bush, were Tom and Sarah. They were locked in a passionate embrace, their faces inches apart, their bodies close. Tom's hand was under Sarah's shirt, her legs wrapped around his waist. They didn't even notice me standing there, watching in shock as my worst fear unfolded before my eyes. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, unable to breathe. It felt like someone had punched me in the stomach, knocking all the air out of me. When I finally found my voice, it came out as a scream, raw, angry, and full of pain. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, my voice trembling. They jumped apart, both looking at me in shock. Tom tried to stammer something about it not being what it looked like, but the truth was there. Undeniable. Sarah's face went pale as tears filled her eyes. And she tried to apologize. But I couldn't bear to hear her voice. Without another word, I turned and ran, my heart breaking with every step. That night, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay there, not with the memories of what I had seen. I checked into a hotel in a nearby city. Needing space to think, to breathe, Tom called me repeatedly, as did Sarah and my parents. But I didn't answer. I couldn't face them, not after everything that had happened. After a few days, I realized there was one person who needed to know the truth, Sarah's fiancé. Mark. He deserved to know what kind of person he was marrying. My hands trembled as I dialed his number. And when he answered, I could hear the confusion in his voice. I took a deep breath and told him everything, how I had noticed Sarah's behavior, how Tom had dismissed my concerns, and finally, what I had seen in the garden. There was silence on the other end, a long, heavy silence. Then, in a calm, measured voice, Mark thanked me and hung up. I didn't know what he would do. I half expected him to forgive her, to brush it all off as a misunderstanding. But on the day of the wedding, I received a call from my cousin, Emma. There was urgency in her voice as she told me what had happened. Mark had called off the wedding. In front of everyone, he had declared that he could not marry someone who had betrayed her own sister. He had apologized to my parents and explained everything, leaving Sarah standing there, pale and shaken. Emma told me that the entire room had been stunned. My parents were devastated, Sarah was in tears, and the guests were left in shock. As Emma recounted the events, I felt a strange mix of emotions, vindication that the truth had come out, but also deep sadness for the pain that had rippled through my family. I had never wanted things to end this way. I had wanted to protect my sister, to keep my family intact, but in the end, the truth had torn us all apart. The aftermath was a blur. My parents were angry with me, blaming me for the ruined wedding. Sarah refused to speak to me, and Tom's attempts to contact me were met with silence. I knew I could never forgive either of them. Trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild, especially when the betrayal comes from those you love most. I spent weeks alone, trying to piece my life back together, to figure out what came next. But amidst the pain, there were moments of clarity. I realized that I had done the right thing, that following my instincts had been the only way to protect myself. I couldn't let myself be gaslighted into believing I was wrong when everything in my gut told me otherwise. And in the end, Mark's decision to confront the truth publicly had been a brave one, one that I deeply respected. There are lessons in betrayal that no one wants to learn. They teach you about strength, about the importance of trusting yourself. Even when everyone around you says you're wrong, they teach you that sometimes, love isn't enough to keep people from hurting you, and that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. Months later, as I sat with Emma, who had become my greatest source of support, she said something that stuck with me. She told me that sometimes, the people we think we know best are the ones who surprise us the most, for better or worse. And she was right. My sister had surprised me. Tom had surprised me. But most of all, I had surprised myself. I had found a strength I didn't know I had. A strength that had carried me through the darkest days. This story is not just about betrayal, it's about resilience. It's about standing up for yourself when no one else will. About choosing your own well-being over the expectations of others. And as painful as it was, I am grateful for the lessons it taught me. To anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, my advice is this: trust yourself. Even when the world tries to make you doubt, the truth will always find its way to the surface. And when it does, you need to be ready to face it, no matter the cost. Son accidentally broke my dad's favorite vase. He refused replacement but won't stop complaining and got mad even I bought a new one. There are moments in life that seem simple but turn out to hold an unexpected amount of weight, causing ripples we never could have predicted. Today, I want to take you on a journey that started with an accident. A broken vase, but ended up testing relationships and revealing deeper truths about human nature, love, and the struggle between resentment and forgiveness. It all began with a simple mishap. My father owned a glass vase, a relic he had loved since I was a teenager. It wasn't the kind of object you would put in a museum, nor did it have any historical value. But for my father, it was a symbol. It held countless wine corks, each with its own memory, a silent witness to the occasions we cherished. The vase sat proudly on a small table in the living room, never touched, Always admired. The incident that set this story in motion occurred one crisp October afternoon. My young son, barely 2 years old, was exploring my father's house. Filled with curiosity, as toddlers do, he ran around, his laughter filling the air. Until suddenly, crash, the table toppled, and the vase, with all its cherished corks, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The laughter stopped, replaced by a stunned silence. My husband and I rushed over to clean the mess. Our hearts pounding. I could feel the weight of what had just happened. I immediately turned to my father and apologized, offering to replace the vase. He waved me off, smiling faintly, and said, "It's just a vase. I'm glad the little one is okay." I offered again, and again he refused. For the next several months, I kept offering to replace it, but my father was adamant, "There's no need." I believed him. I thought that was the end of it. But things took a turn. As time went on, my father started bringing up the vase more and more often, almost as a casual aside. He'd mention how much he had liked it, how hard it was to find something similar, and how the corks represented memories. I noticed a hint of resentment creeping into his voice, resentment I hadn't seen before. He even made jokes about hiding things from my son during our visits. Comments that were veiled in humor but carried a sting. I remember sitting there, smiling awkwardly, trying to laugh along, while something inside me twisted uncomfortably. I began to feel like the apology I had given, which I thought was accepted, was now being unraveled. It was as if the forgiveness he had offered was being retracted bit by bit, replaced by something I couldn't quite name, a sense of growing resentment. One day, during a family gathering, one of my father's friends, who hadn't been to his house in a while, asked about the vase. He looked at me and said, "Oh, my little grandson broke it, and no one ever replaced it." His voice was casual, but the words stung like a slap. I could see my husband, standing nearby, tense up. I was speechless. All the offers I had made, all the apologies, had they meant nothing? After the party, I confronted my father. I asked him why he kept bringing it up, why he kept saying I hadn't replaced it when he'd told me not to. He looked at me with a mix of anger and frustration and said, "I have the right to be upset. That vase meant a lot to me. Your son broke it, and you never replaced it." The words hung between us, heavy and undeniable. I realized, then, that my father hadn't truly forgiven me. Maybe he thought he had. Maybe he wanted to. But something about losing that vase, the memories it represented, had festered within him. I told him that he couldn't keep blaming my child for an accident and that he needed to decide if he wanted to forgive us or let this resentment continue to grow. He didn't say anything, and I left feeling more lost than ever. I turned to friends and even online communities for advice. The responses were mixed. Some suggested I should just keep buying vases for every holiday until he had too many to complain about. Others said I should simply replace it without asking, even if my father protested, just to make him stop. And then there were those who told me that my father was being unreasonable, that he was holding onto something that wasn't about the vase at all, but about something deeper. I took the advice of replacing the vase, hoping it would bring some closure. I found one that looked almost identical. I brought it to our next family lunch, and for a moment, things seemed better. My father even smiled as he and my son filled it with the old corks he had saved. I thought, finally, we could put this behind us. But the next day, my father called me. He had looked up the vase online and realized it wasn't as expensive as he remembered. His voice, cold and distant, asked, "Is this the best you could find?" Something inside me snapped. I told him I was done with the passive-aggressive comments. Done trying to fix something he clearly didn't want fixed. I told him that we wouldn't be coming to his house anymore, but he was welcome to come see us if he wanted to. He hung up without saying much, and I was left there, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. It's hard, isn't it? Trying to navigate family relationships when emotions are so tangled. When forgiveness is offered with one hand but taken back with the other. I love my father. I truly do. But this whole situation made me realize that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes, you need boundaries to protect the people you care about, even if it's from themselves. I want to share some reflections that came to me as I tried to understand this situation. To make sense of why something as simple as a vase could cause so much pain. I began to think about the symbolism of the vase itself, fragile, beautiful, full of memories. It struck me that the vase was a metaphor for our family relationships. It held memories, yes, but it was also delicate. Once broken, it could be replaced, but it would never be the same. The corks, the memories, could be transferred, but the original vessel was gone. My father wasn't just mourning the loss of a vase. He was mourning the loss of something irreplaceable, a tangible piece of his past. I also thought about my son in all of this. He was too young to understand the complexity of what was happening. But I knew that I had to protect him from the growing resentment in my father's words. I didn't want him to grow up thinking he was a troublemaker. That his mistakes defined how people saw him. We all make mistakes, and children, especially, are bound to make them. The true test of love is how we respond to those mistakes, with understanding, compassion, or with anger and blame. In the middle of all this, I came across a story that resonated deeply with me. It was about a family who had a similar cherished object, a clock that had been passed down for generations. One day, the clock was broken by accident, and the family was devastated. They tried to repair it, but it was never quite the same. Over time, the clock became a symbol of their resilience, a reminder that even when things break, they can still be beautiful, still hold meaning, even if they're different. It made me realize that my father and I needed to find a way to see our relationship like that, not perfect, not the same as it once was, but still meaningful, still worth cherishing. As the months went by, I tried to maintain some form of contact with my father. I invited him to our house, tried to bridge the gap that had formed between us. He came, sometimes, but the visits were short. The conversation stilted. He no longer brought up the vase, but the absence of it hung between us like a shadow. I knew he missed the way things used to be. And in a way, so did I. But I also knew that I couldn't go back to pretending everything was okay. That his passive aggressiveness hadn't hurt me. That it hadn't changed the way I saw him. Eventually, I started to see small changes. My father would call, not to complain, but to ask about my son. He would drop by with a small gift, a toy car or a book, something to make my son smile. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was something. It was his way of reaching out, of trying to rebuild what had been broken. And I accepted it, cautiously, because I knew that healing takes time. That forgiveness isn't a one-time thing but a process. Something we have to choose again and again. One day, during one of these visits, my father sat down next to me and said, "You know, I never realized how much that vase meant to me until it was gone. But I think I was wrong to hold on to that. It's just a thing. What matters is right here." He gestured to my son, who was playing on the floor, completely oblivious to the weight of that moment. I looked at my father and saw, for the first time in a long time, the man I had admired growing up, a man capable of love, of humility, of change. I wish I could say that everything was perfect after that, that our relationship was magically healed. But life isn't like that. There are still moments of tension, still times when the past creeps in, when the old wounds ache. But there are also moments of laughter, of connection, of genuine love. And maybe that's enough. As I share this story, I want to leave you with a few lessons that I've learned along the way. First, forgiveness is not a one-time act. It's something we have to choose, over and over, even when it's hard, even when the other person doesn't make it easy. Second, sometimes the things we hold onto, the objects, the memories, the resentments, can weigh us down more than we realize. Letting go is difficult, but it's often the only way to move forward. And finally, love is fragile, like a vase, but it's also resilient. It can break, it can be mended, and even if it's never quite the same, it can still be beautiful. I hope that by sharing my story, you might find something that resonates with you, something that helps you navigate the complexities of your own relationships. We all have our own vases, our own fragile things that we hold dear, and sometimes they break. But maybe, just maybe, that's where the real beauty lies, not in the perfection of what we keep, but in the way we choose to pick up the pieces, to forgive, to love, and to begin again.